This is part B of the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street, that is, the contents and the role of the newspapers called collectively Fleet Street newspapers. Those are published from Fleet Street originally. Most of them are now. They are printed from different addresses in and around London, but still collectively known as Fleet Street. Now this one by India Night on the Sunday Times, as we mentioned in the diagnosis part A today, is about a child being killed by children. We cannot accept this. This is the focus being on the child called Keon Lincoln. Page 15. And the India Night column refers to the Black Lives Matter kind of campaign that began after the murder of George Floyd. Now, she doesn't say in there that George Floyd was murdered in America by the police, which is significant structure in the sentence. I'm so tired of naysayers saying that Black Lives Matter is an American import and wholly unrepresentative of British society, and therefore neither here nor there, silly, dismissible. For sure, the only reason it's an American import is that there is no homegrown equivalent. You take what you can. If you finally glimpse the cavalry coming over the hill, you don't stop to ask yourself if it speaks in your accent. By the way, where are all the people who claim Black Lives Matter? Now that is Black Lives Matter without any capital. The people who changed their Instagram posts to a black square for one day last June to show their support for the movement in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in America, or deprived their followers of their entire social media presence for one whole day. Do they have anything to say? Is the killing of Keon Lincoln, a child, less horrific than the killing of George Floyd? Is there a hierarchy when it comes to black people being killed? Or are we so used to it happening that we make a noise only when other people pipe up first? In the next paragraph, she says, Detective Chief Inspector Alistair Orencas, who is leading the inquiry into Keon's death, said the boy had died in the most violent of circumstances. Keon's family said he was full of life and love. He was 15. We should all be angrier. Now that is what India Night is saying in the Sunday Times today, 24th of January, 2021. Now, as we started in the first part A, talking about this same piece by India Night in the Sunday Times today, our campaign has been tackling in terms of diagnosing, examining, not only the inadequacy in the organization of the Black Lives Matter campaign to the extent that it is organized in this country, in the UK. And also around the idea of Black Lives Matter. Because the idea of Black Lives Matter is not just about what is happening in America or what has happened in similar ways when the police have been accused of having murdered, targeted for murder and murdered, or targeted for killing black, mainly black man, young black man in this country. The notable one happened in the London borough of Haringey in 2011, which was followed by a short spell of protests, which were called the riots by the Fleet Street and allied kind of mainstream organs of the propaganda in this country. The disturbances, so-called, that took place around London, including the burning of a big building in Croydon, the disturbances were mentioned not in terms of the origins of the protests after the murder of the black young man by the police in Haringey. It became riot without any substantive or contextual reference to racism in the police or anywhere else in the UK society. And this is where the piece about this 15-year-old boy being killed by other black boys, that's the actual inference from the headline and the presentation, is also misleading, because she obviously doesn't know about the Khoodeelaar campaign, and she doesn't appear to recognize that we have, in the last 6 years or so, since the murder by a Bangladeshi gang of a Bangladeshi schoolboy in Poplar near the Langdon Park School. And our campaign has been the only one that has been actually asking the question and updating contextually on the role of the local Tower Hamlets Council. And we have been referring to the fact that I personally made a number of calls to the Tower Hamlets Council, which were at that time lumbered with the incumbents of the corrupt post holder at the expense of the elected mayor, corrupt post holder Luthuraman. And I personally, that is physically personally, went to the Tower Hamlets Council's so-called headquarters, otherwise known as the Mulberry Place in London E14 2BG, London E14 2BG, and spoke to what was described falsely, untruthfully, and wrongly as the community safety cabinet member called Ohid Ahmed. And I had attempted to extract from Ohid Ahmed the evidence of what the council were doing to, first of all, stop the violence generally in the community, and secondly, stop violence by members of the Bangladeshi community. That is a demographic description, not a moral description, because if there were a moral affinity and moral awareness and concern among Bangladeshis about other Bangladeshis' rights, then they would not have been targeting that boy, and they would not obviously have done what they did to him. So I asked, or tried to ask, Ohid Ahmed to answer all the questions that I could put to him and all the questions that arose. And Ohid Ahmed did not give any answers. what he spewed amounted to no answer, no commitment, no comment, and not really concerned about what I was drawing attention to. And when I asked him about the gangs that were operating in the Bangladeshi community, made up of Bangladeshi, mainly, as far as I could see, young males, Wahid Ahmad said that he and his colleagues in the council did not get involved in that. I'm not quoting Wahid Ahmad, I'm paraphrasing what he said. In other words, what I'm saying is that Wahid Ahmad showed no recognition of any duty by Tar Hamlets Council clique he was a part of to address the occurrence of gang violence by Bangladeshi gangsters against Bangladeshi targets. And he said that the police were the ones that should be asked about that. When I asked him how I could ask the police, did the police and the council have any contact? Because in the publicity that Wahid Ahmad kind of was given by the council at the time, fronted by the occupant, the corrupt occupant of the corrupt post of elected mayor, Lutfur Rahman, in that series of publicity, it was claimed that Wahid Ahmad was working very closely with the police in the London borough of Tar Hamlets in East London, in Greater London, to the extent that regularly, with regular intervals, Tar Hamlets Council at the time, the propaganda unit, the communications unit manned and womaned by liars, would issue lying claims that Wahid Ahmad would be doing a walk across one part or another part of Tar Hamlets, accompanied by the then leading post holder in the Metropolitan Police in the name of Tar Hamlets Borough. So therefore, there was evidence that when it suited their publicity, propaganda strategy, Wahid Ahmad and his colleagues in the corruptly fronted corrupt clique of the council, Tar Hamlets Council, not only made exaggerated claims about their proximity, their closeness with the police, but they went out of their kind of limits and made bombastic claims that didn't have any factual substance. Walking around any part of the borough, accompanied by a number of police persons, never could constitute doing the policing work, doing the community safety work. It was a shameless display of exhibition, corruptly crafted to show that Wahid Ahmad was doing something. And that was done on the basis, on the assumption that most people affected by that publicity or targeted by that publicity were too stupid to see the difference between that lie and the truth of the Tar Hamlets Council's negligence and failure to deal with its duties to safeguard the community and prevent occurrences of criminality either through gangsterism or by other means in the community, whether the crime and criminality were being done by Bangladeshis against other Bangladeshis or by Bangladeshis against people who are not Bangladeshis, etc., etc. So we have since then, that was 2013, published many hundreds of comments and references to that online and accessibly. And yet, India Night in the Sunday Times today is generally, of course, she's not referring to tower hamlets, and she's not referring to the Bangladeshis or the other kind of communities settled in the UK, settled within quotation marks in the UK and coming from the subcontinent, Pakistan or India. But essentially, it is the same issue. Criminality and violence within the same ethnic or racial backgrounded community, done by one or a number of them, members of the same community, demographically defined, against other similar members of the community. And it seems that India not only recognizes any comments or any statement made by people of white European background and identity, or anyone who is connected with the operation of the stoogery, ethnic surrogacy, and ethnic mental slavery. So, for instance, if Lenny Henry, who is a notorious kind of token of stoogery and racist patronage and servility, if Lenny Henry made a statement, then they would be quite acceptable to Indianite who says that crime by children against other children is not or are not acceptable. So the meaning of acceptability and the degree to which that is actually inclusive of all the evidence and all the implications and all the impacts is subject to the whims and prejudices and ignorance of the likes of Indianite. In the Sunday Times today, there is no column, there is no comment or commentary that reflects the population in the UK today. Especially so, since the front page of the Sunday Times says that less and less people in this country are identifying themselves as British. And here is the front page of the same Sunday Times, inside which Indianite, of course, appears as a columnist about Black Lives Matter and the murder of children by children. So that's the one. And the bit about the fewer people now regard themselves as British appears under that banner, as we said in part A. Fewer people now regard themselves as British. So the revelation is the word revelation is a lie, because that shows that the Sunday Times writers and editors and sub-editors have been asleep and are in denial. So the Black Lives Matter doesn't matter to Indianite because the comments about Black people's lives are only worth recognizing by Indianite or by the Sunday Times if they're made by non-Black people, European people. Non-Black here in our comprehensive context, including people from the African and Asian backgrounds. And as we said before, people of Asian backgrounds in our context of the factual references actually refer to people from the subcontinent, which is only part of Asia, but the context in this commentary actually makes that the significant substantive demographic part and parcel of the full background that we are referring to in the context of Black Lives Matter. Violence by Asian people against other Asian people, and violence by people of African background and origins against other people of African and Asian origins in Britain, in the UK, let's say, has been treated with denial by the people of each section or each part of the population. And there has been no recognition in Fleet Street, by Fleet Street, and by the mainstream media, including by the BBC, that this is the violence and the fatalities are as bad when committed by black people against other black people as it is when committed by white criminals against black targets. And the word and the concept black here, including people of African and Asian backgrounds. Now, if India Knight can write a column of the type that she has done today, or done in the Sunday Times as published today, without recognizing any of the work that our campaign does, then it shows that she is in willful, ignorant state of denial of the existence of the whole community. So whoever she is accusing of being silent or being tokenistically only concerned about Black Lives Matter is not representing the entirety of the population. In fact, she is not representing or addressing or talking about, let alone recognizing, the existence of these communities, let alone the existence of campaigns within or from such communities. Our community, our kind of existence and our activities constitute extensive, consistent, and continuous evidence that India Knight is wrong, and India Knight is perpetuating a racist denial of the existence of the communities and the existence of the concerns in the communities. The existence of the concerns in the communities may not be adequate when taken as a whole. For example, to our knowledge, there is no evidence, there is no record, and there is no accessible evidence that people in the mainly African origin or African backgrounded parts of the black population are actively monitoring and watching and doing things about this black people committing murders and other crimes, other serious crimes against other black people. Same applies to the whole of the Asian community except our campaign, because we are the ones that are making daily references to this, either expressly, literally, or in effect by implication in the context of our diagnostic commentary on the contents and the role of the British media, Fleet Street, in other words. Now, India Knight may or may not be connected with India in the sense that one of our ancestors or one part of our family may be kind of may have originated from India or the subcontinent. Whether it is the case or not doesn't matter, because even if it were the case, she would not be kind of in the context of her getting or enjoying a platform on the Sunday Times, partly because her father, Andrew Knight, was employed by the employers of the owners of the Sunday Times. But regardless of that, she does not have any physical kind of attributes or traces of being capable of being targeted as a target by racists, because she looks as white as George Galloway said about Una King. When George Galloway was reacting to Jeremy Paxman, not Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy Paxman on the Newsnight program when Paxman quizzed George Galloway and accused George Galloway of having ousted a black woman from her constituency at the time of the election, which was Bethnal Green and Bow. Galloway strongly responded by saying that Una King was not black. She did not look black. That was what he was meaning. And it is possible to find evidence that Una King has not been treated as black. Although she claims, her main capital claim, after she got in and made public the identity of her father, it became very clear that she had been capitalizing on her American father being black, her British mother being white, of course, and did not amount to her being black from the mother's side. But when she was mixed race background, physically she was not seen as black in the pigmentation sense. So that's what George Galloway was pointing at and pointing out to Jeremy Paxman of the Newsnight at that time on May the 6th, 2005. And the same applies to Indianite. Even if she is of mixed, let's say, Asian and European backgrounds, parentage, her father is, of course, white Andronite, so therefore he is not Indian. But if he were Indian or her mother was Indian from the subcontinent, the pigmentation, Indianite's pigmentation, makes it impossible to tell her apart from ordinary white people of white backgrounds and ancestry and parentage. So her knowledge is based on her experience, and her experience of racist violence would not be based on anything she has experienced in the way that people of evidently African and Asian backgrounds experience and suffer. And she doesn't have anything to say about the rest of the factors. One factor is that in the case of this 15-year-old child, the African backgrounded people are silent on the actual physical kind of violence. But she's also not talking about the role of the media mainstream, the Fleet Street, informing people's minds and mentalities about the rights and the extent of the rights and the level of equal rights and entitlements to protection from violence, regardless of the ethnicity of the attacker and the perpetrator of the attacks and the violence. And of course, she's not talking about the parliament legislation. She's not talking about the treatment by the corrupt and racist court system of criminals and offenders and wrongdoers as based on the ethnicity of the wrongdoers and the victims of their wrongdoing. And it goes on. So the Indianite piece today in the Sunday Times is as unrepresentative of the evidence that exists and warranting complete attention and action, both morally, ethically, legally, judicially, and in terms of the day-to-day duties as owed to the community by people holding posts in the agencies of the state, including in the locally elected councils such as Tower Hamlets that we discussed in relation to the 2013 fatal stabbing by a gang of Bangladeshi criminals of the Langdon Park schoolboy, Ajmal Ahmed. So Fleet Street is failing again. And in this case, Fleet Street is failing in a racist denial way. And India Knight's role is as a part of the racist deniers. This is the Mail on Sunday that is doing the same kind of survey or the finding. And we shall be talking about that, the finding about the state of the UK and Britain and what the majority of the people think of Britain today. That's the headline. Of the Sunday Times today, that our DC United Kingdom and the majority back border polls in Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the SNP set for May 2021 landslide, and nearly 1 in 3 want referendum in Wales, and fewer people now regard themselves as British. And the Sunday Times main editorial is, of course, a fantasy one, because it says that Johnson's next test will be to take back control of the Union. What they are using there is to take back control of Britain after Brexit. Now that has not worked. So take back control being used by the Sunday Times in that editorial headline is stupid, factually unsustainable, unfounded, bogus, false. And the fact that they even dare to say that Johnson can take care of the Union, take back control of the Union, is totally stupid. Because Johnson is not able to take back control of anything. First of all, he has not got the ability, the intellectual, the moral kind of constitution. And secondly, his attention span is unfit for anyone who wants to hold the position of a public office, which requires 1,000,000 times more dedication than he has ever been found to give to any duties. For example, Johnson's behavior when he was imposed as the Foreign Secretary, and his comments about Nazanin Ghaffari Ratcliffe about what she was doing in Iran only helped the Iranian regime to use his utterance made in the UK as evidence that Nazanin Ghaffari Ratcliffe was a spy, a charge which she denies, and the charge has not been substantiated by any other evidence. The only evidence they could ever get really was from Boris Johnson. And doesn't the Sunday Times know about such dire unfitness in Boris Johnson? So we raised that question, and we shall be updating on that in due course. Now here is the son of a Pakistani man and a white mother, who is like Una King and like India Knight, not pigmentationally capable of being seen as coming from the background, Pakistani background or Asian background. This is Matthew Saeed, and his whole career as an employee of Rupert Murdoch and as a peddler of the lies and racism has been to serve as a stooge, as another organ promoting the reactionary imperialist, corrupt line and narrative. When he sits as or used to sit before the lockdown in the studios of the Sky News as a newspaper reviewer, Matthew Saeed was corrupt and he was lying. And he's lying even today in this otherwise kind of misleading headline, which reads, Piers Morgan's idiotic rants reduce subtle arguments to sound bites. Now, there is no difference between subtle arguments and sound bites either. And if Piers Morgan is idiotic, ranting, then so is Matthew Saeed, who is a liar. Piers Morgan is a proven liar because he was given the sack from the Daily Mirror after it was discovered that he had made up some tales about the British Army. And regardless of that, Piers Morgan was a peddler of Donald Trump. He was the British peddler of Donald Trump in the kind of mainstream so-called media. And Piers Morgan's idiocy matches the idiocies and the lying and the dishonesty of Matthew Saeed. And Matthew Saeed is calling Piers Morgan a parasite. Let's read the parasite bit. Morgan is perhaps the archetype of the world into which we have arrived, a parasite on the contours of democracy. He is a cunning operator who spotted the opportunities of Twitter early, learning to surf the waves that to outsiders seems arbitrary, but to him have become like second nature. He takes artificially emphatic stances, conveys false certainty, caricatures positions, strips away ambiguity, seeks scapegoats for complex problems, and cajoles guests into simplistic answers that mislead the public, and then seeks to humiliate them when they think better of returning to the studio. He becomes a temporary hero to the deluded souls for whom he becomes a cheerleader. Now, we have said all of that before, and we have said that including about Matthew Saeed, and we have devised the word the gullibles to represent the Little England population, the masses that are brainwashed, zombified, and misled daily. Not just by Piers Morgan, who is known as Piers Moron, but also others. And here is a promotion by the Mail on Sunday of Boris Johnson, a picture that could not be more promotional. Johnson is shown standing up and holding his right arm aloft with a victory sign, and they're putting this as Boris is first European leader called by Joe Biden. He tells new president his election is, etc., etc. Now, this is the promotion, stupid, corrupt, absolutely lying promotion for Boris Johnson by the Mail on Sunday. And he says that a moment of hope at a dark time for the world. That is what they're saying Johnson is representing in that. And this is the presentation, the display by the Mail on Sunday of the same so-called survey. And it says that in a landmark Mail on Sunday survey, this is not what the Sunday Times is saying. The Sunday Times is saying a different kind of survey or different source of information. And it's saying that 40% say mental health hit during lockdown, and third suffer fall in income as farms are forced to close. Half have piled on weight, and our diet has got worse, and they've got detailed breakdown of the percentage of people who have got worse during the lockdown. And they've got more promotion against the ordinary comprehensive schools, and they're promoting the Boris Johnson right wing, unfit to govern, unfit to be imposed pretender. Now they've got a 2-page spread about the events in Russia against the arrest of a opposition person in Russia by Vladimir Putin. And they've got an investigation by Neil Craven, deputy city editor. They're saying that the foreign-owned farms borrowed hundreds of millions in cheap government loans to get through the pandemic, then doled out billions in dividends to wealthy investors. Now, is that a news? Not to anyone who has been watching or reading or accessing our commentary, world exclusive commentary. This is something that we have been saying all along. So they are lying about suddenly investigating this so-called investigation into the corruption and abuse of billions of pounds of public money that are being the Mail on Sunday is the Sunday equivalent or the Sunday version of the Daily Mail, and it is perniciously, poisonously edited and published. Perniciously and poisonously because every single topic in its display, every single topic is stood upside down, contrary to the facts, contrary to the evidence. For example, the 5 billion insult to taxpayers is not an insult, it's a robbery of the public, not the taxpayers. Robbery of the public, because the 5 billion is only a tip of the iceberg of the billions. Hundreds of billions being abused by the conservatives who are filling the pockets of the contractors. In current context, most notoriously, the contractors engaged in destroying the English countryside in the name of High Speed 2 railway line from London to Birmingham and so on. Now, the Mail on Sunday is not connecting the HS2 and the foreign companies corruptly given billions to the shortage of equipment, shortage of computers, and shortage of funds for the schools, or shortage of funds for the NHS main vital health workers. Because if they did, they would have shown up Johnson as the unfit, as the cruelly negligent occupant in the post at number 10 Downing Street, who should be called on to resign. Instead, they're showing him up every single topic and every single story. And that is the actual agenda of the right-wing Brexiteering Mail on Sunday and the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Boris Kraft and the Daily Express of Beaverbrook, the poisonous Beaverbrook. The role of the Mail on Sunday is like the role of the Beaverbrook poisonous legacy, the Daily Suppress. And Edward Said is ending his stupid, dishonest piece about the idiotic Piers Morgan by saying he refuses to lose his optimism, that is Said. The belief that with courage we can transcend this malaise. What courage? When people are starving, people are going hungry, children are going hungry, people are under threat of eviction, people are denied access to due process and fair trial or fairness. Optimism is not something that even occurs. So the one stupidity of the Sunday Times and Matthew Said, we go to the Sunday Express, the Beaverbrook criminality. And with shameless brazenness and denial, they are promoting Boris Johnson. While Bantam, the so-called expert, is saying, let's stay patient. That is, the crisis is still ongoing and rampant. So Fleet Street continues to kind of tell lies. Now the Sunday People has got a front page that appears to be kind of questioning Boris Johnson's fitness and Boris Johnson's, but it's not questioning Boris Johnson's honesty. And it's a piece by Nicholas Small and John Siddle, which reads, Boris Johnson is taking the biggest gamble of his career over delays to the COVID vaccine program. Now that is a giveaway because it's not really talking about the truth. It's talking about his career and his vaccine, promoting vaccine. But in the other headlines in today's Sunday's Fleet Street versions, they're saying that the vaccine, those who are given the vaccine should not be traveling, should not be breaking the lockdown rules because the vaccine is no guarantee that the vaccinated would not spread the virus. That's a giveaway. There's a confession that the vaccine is overhyped, overpromoted, and should not be promoted anymore. And its actual effectiveness should be checked with thorough laboratory and clinical and other tests and investigation. But the Fleet Street papers are not saying that. Not even the Daily Mirror group, Sunday People, is part of the Daily Mirror, which pretends to be against the conservatives. It is not. On the evidence, we are saying. And so this is part of the denial and the lying that takes place 24/7 within UK central government departments, within UK central government agencies, by MPs, by peers, by local councils, by NHS bureaucracies, by the banks, by the courts, corrupt courts, and by the corrupt licensed law traders, so-called barristers, solicitors, legal executives, and by the big charities, so-called RSPCA, Age Concern, and other highly corrupt and highly unrepresentative kind of organizations that claim money And what they're doing here on the Sunday Mirror, on the front page, they are doing the shocking corona fatalities, saying that grieving families call for an inquiry into the Prime Minister's handling of COVID, as UK death toll is this week set to reach another grim milestone, which is how they're presenting it, that is 100,000 people dead. Now, this is not the truth of the matter. Well, this is not most of the truth of the matter, because as we have been chronicling daily in the daily diagnosis of Fleet Street, the newspapers, so-called newspapers, the Fleet Street papers, including the Mirror, are colluding with the liars in government. Liars in government is being used within quotation marks, let's say for clarification, for extra emphasis. And what is happening is that they are not telling the truth about the areas. They're giving lumps and aggregate numbers, like this one, 100,000 people dying. They're not saying which parts of England or UK has what number or numbers of infections every day. They're not saying that about giving the statistics or the data or the information or the numbers based on weeks either or months. And they know the facts. Because if the daily and the weekly and the monthly rates of infection in each area, let's say distributed by postcodes, if that information were made available in the newspapers, Fleet Street, and the equivalents and counterparts across the rest of the country, then the people in the affected areas would be able to make a decision as to their own movements. So the newspapers are covering up the truth. And all these headlines about Johnson and this and that, these are diversions, dire diversions, deliberate diversions, intentionally negligent and corruptly perpetrated diversions away from the facts. So it's a dark age, it's a darkness. It's a darkness in which the millions have been plunged by the so-called newspaper, supposed to be bringing news. News is what is happening in the areas of the highest concern. And they're not giving that news. They have not given that news for the whole of the 2020 since the virus was discovered or announced or admitted to have started in Britain in early 2020. And they're not doing this in the second year, which is the calendar year of 2021. And what is the Observer doing? Observer is supposed to be it's owned by the Guardian, and it has got a magazine kind of celebrating spring. And they've got an item which is about the impact of Brexit, and it serves as an item of evidence confirming what we have been saying all along and what was inevitable to happen, which is that move to the European Union to avoid Brexit costs. Businesses have been told. Now, this is a piece byline to the Observer's political editor, so-called Toby Helm. And it starts, British businesses that export to the continent are being encouraged by government trade advisors to set up separate companies inside the EU. So scrap back Brexit. That's what they're saying. And there is the bigger piece in the Observer is Minister faces fury over mass outbreak of COVID at DVLA. DVLA is the transport, the motor safety kind of checking organization. And the minister is, of course, Grant Shapps. Now, Grant Shapps is in post in the Boris Johnson cabal as the Minister, Secretary of State at the expense of transport. Grant Shapps is another liar, proven liar. It's not me calling him a liar because he is on the record as having found to have lied many times. So a proven liar in post that concerns the safety of people, and the safety of people warrant absolute honesty and integrity of information by the department that Shapps is now in post is as in charge of. That is evidence of Boris Johnson being unfit. He should not have appointed Shapps in that place in the first place. And the same thing applies to Priti Patel, the interior minister, whose department has lost personnel data that affects hundreds of thousands of people. And Shapps has in post as the so-called health secretary. Matthew Hancock, who is another liar and unfit, he has got in post as the Secretary of State in the name of education, schools, Gavin Williamson, another absolute moron. Now, what is this highlighting about British democracy, British Parliament? It is highlighting that the so-called opposition, so-called leader, Keir Starmer, is dead politically dead, politically sunk in the dungeons, in the darkness. And he is doing that as a colluder with the Johnson cabal and its misadministration of duties and its failure to deliver duties and services to the community of individuals and families and persons that deserve vital, urgent service. So the service is being denied to the people, and Keir Starmer could be treated as no longer politically alive. Whereas and there are dozens of items of contradictory information. And there is a piece, another piece, hundreds of pieces could be written and published about Donald Trump's lunacy and absolute criminality. Because it's not about democracy, it's about the truth, about the honesty and integrity of the evidence that Trump denies. And Trump was known to be doing that, but they didn't publish the facts at the time. They're beginning to publish some of the facts now, but most of the facts they covered up and they hid while he was still in incumbents at the White House. Now, Jeremy Hunt, who did severe damage to the various parts of the NHS while he was in post as Theresa May's cabinet minister at the expense of the health service. Now, the observer, which is supposed to know and have the evidence so that it could not give him the positive plug that he's been given here. Hunt's call for action. Lockdown just isn't working quickly enough. Now, how dare they? Of course, it is not working. Because in the so-called lockdown, serious issues of relevance to people's safety and people's freedom and people's safety and freedom and protection and the duties of the various providers are being jeopardized. This is a rare piece, absolutely rare piece, and it is not consistent with what the Jewish community has been reportedly doing elsewhere in most of the cases. This time, it is not about the solidarity with the Muslims of the Uyghur region in China. It is in solidarity with the foreign policy strategies that have targeted the Chinese regime for criticism and wrongly and dishonestly suddenly realized that Muslims in Uyghurs have been prosecuted and treated as victims of genocide and genocidal policies for decades. Not just Uyghurs, but Muslims in China generally have been treated, attacked by genocidal policies. And the United Kingdom has not even recognized that. The Uyghurs have only become relevant because they are still part of China and inside China and can be referred to as victims of Chinese misconduct and criminality without the critics having to have any interest, for example, similar to the British having the Hong Kong interest. That doesn't have to be the case. So while the British imperialists or the agents of British imperialism, as seen via Hong Kong, they have lost the kind of say about Hong Kong after the agreement, after the deal, and after the departure of the British from Hong Kong. They have retained the interest, the imperialist interest, to have a pretext and an excuse to have something to say about China's behavior towards people of Hong Kong who have been brainwashed and culturally hoodwinked and subliminally influenced to become kind of British in their mentality and attitude. And that mentality and attitude has been fostered and generated by the British following a policy of imperialism, as opposed to a policy of human rights and solidarity. And in encouraging a Jewish group to feature as expressing solidarity for the Uyghur Muslims, they are proving the point that they are dishonest, these strategists who have created the news item. Because the very same people are not doing similar things in showing the Jewish groups, showing solidarity with the people of Palestine. And the people of Palestine have as much rights as the people of Uyghurs have as much rights and need for protection against persecution based on religion and ethnicity. And the Palestinian people are being forgotten and not treated in the same way. And so we say that the observer is being racist and stupid and dishonest. Diagnosis of Fleet Street, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. That's what we are doing. And we're pointing this out. And we have pointed out the racist role of the Sunday Times and the racist column by India Knight in the Sunday Times today about Black Lives Matter. Now, about Black Lives Matter and the wider context of our commentary and examination of the evidence of Black Lives Matter, we have discussed before the role of Marina Salandi Brown, who got one of her managers at the BBC to write a letter or write a fax or write a statement claiming that our inquiries about Marina Salandi Brown's unsubstantiated assertion defending the BBC's racism needed to be supported by independent objective evidence, which we demanded from her. And that demand was suppressed and treated as harassment of Marina Salandi Brown. Now, Marina Salandi Brown was married to the same Brown who is now married to Yasmin Alibai C. Now, the C that we have been using about Yasmin Alibai Brown shall remain unpronounced for morality and ethical and taste reasons. Suffice to say that this Brown seems to be adept and practiced at getting married to women of either Asian backgrounds or of mixed race backgrounds. And what Marina Salandi Brown showed in her corrupt behavior in getting this denial, racist denial by this male manager, illustrates the point that despite the fact that she was at the early stage involved with the Black media workers group that I was part of, but I was a critical part, as always, of that, and I could foresee the behavior of the likes of Marina Salandi Brown once they got placements in the mainstream media, which is what I had predicted and I've been vindicated on. Most people who met Marina Salandi Brown, who I had invited to attend one of the events of the training programs I organized across inner London, and this one was held in the Lambeth Town Hall in Brixton. None of the people present there would have known about my role years ago in the founding of the Black Media Workers Group. And the Black Media Workers Group disintegrated, as I had predicted, because of corruption of the people given posts and money through it. And so Marina Salandi Brown was one of the beneficiaries of the Black Media Workers Group that actually demanded employment rights to be given to members of the Black community. Marina Salandi Brown looks identical in terms of skin color to Una King. So she doesn't look black as such on the first sight, but she termed herself as black, and she attended various events of the Black Media Workers Group in the 1980s. And she got the job with the BBC eventually, and she turned out to be mentally and ethically unfit and dishonest, as her communication in response to my demands for evidence about racism of the BBC shows. So there is a continuation of that kind of behavior by people who call themselves black, but actually behave in accordance with the anti-black, generally anti-black policies. So the Black Lives Matter that has been promoted in Britain and mainly through British papers or mainly through the Fleet Street papers. This kind of promotion is not against racism. This promotion is similar to the tokenistic kind of promotion received by the recipients, and they placed men and women under the ethnic kind of surrogacy program that was promoted by the now kind of displaced or now scrapped and replaced what I called Commission for Racist Enslavement. And the Commission for Racist Enslavement, otherwise known as the Commission for Racial Equality, was set up with the actual passing of the 1976 Race Relations Act. And when it was passed, it came into effect in April, I think, in 1977. The first chair of the Commission for Racist Enslavement was a very brazenly racist man called David Lane. David Lane chaired the launching press conference at a location in Fleet Street, where I was the one who asked him the strategic series of questions. David Lane couldn't answer, and nobody else present at the event raised anything similar to what I asked him. That was April 1977. Now, what I said in effect was to predict that the CRE would become the Commission for Racist Enslavement, which it became. And the Commission for Racist Enslavement committed a lot of racist enslavement activities throughout. As a result of my action, continuing action, consistent actions, there was a national, so-called UK-wide weekend conference held in the aftermath of the 1981 so-called riots. First of all, the so-called riots began in Bristol and then took place in Brixton and then spread into other parts of what is called inner city areas, that is to say, where mixed race people from African and Asian backgrounds were coexisting with people from the indigenous white backgrounds. And places like Liverpool, Toxteth, and Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, London, of course, and Bristol, Cardiff, witnessed temporary demonstrations which included violent actions against buildings and so on. So that was the 1981 riots, the summer of the 1981 riots. Although the Bristol explosion took place in April 1981, the other ones took place during the summer. So that was 1981, 91, 2001, 2011, and this is exactly 20 years, calendar years. Sorry, 40 calendar years since the 1981 riots, so-called, within quotation marks. And in the riots, especially during the activities as part of the riots that took place in Brixton, The Guardian did an unprecedented thing and ran a news item with the byline of Mike Phillips. They had not done any such byline before, or they have not done since. It's Mike Phillips, who was also given a few seconds of the BBC after the first election victory by Barack Obama in the USA. And Mike Phillips made the correct comment about Barack Obama, that he would not deliver. Effectively, what Mike Phillips said was that Barack Obama would not deliver an anti-racist America or anti-racist American presidency. That was right, vindicated, and Barack Obama didn't. So in the piece in 1981, The Guardian ran the piece with the byline of Mike Phillips, but it was a completely dishonest piece. In contrast and in comparison with what he correctly said about Barack Obama years later, that Mike Phillips piece in The Guardian in 1981 was absolutely, completely empty of substance. So it must be, or it must have been, kind of tampered with by The Guardian in the same way that years later, Suzanne Moore's articles were tampered with. And of course, the tampering with was not followed up by Mike Phillips, challenging the tampering with of his substance. I'm assuming in generosity that Mike Phillips did write a more rigorous and more anti-racist piece than appeared under his byline in 1981 in The Guardian. So Mike Phillips didn't protest. If he did protest, it wasn't made known publicly. The Guardian didn't publish the kind of existence of the protest or any opposition or criticism by Mike Phillips of the way that they published his piece. And The Guardian, of course, doesn't publish evidence of people condemning it for racist tampering. And the same thing has happened with Suzanne Moore. It wasn't racist tampering with her, but the tampering with her opinion that was against the particular lobby of a particular aspect of the gender politics today. And Suzanne Moore is now writing in the Daily Borisgraph and probably will be given some kind of token compensatory spot by The Guardian, which wants to hide the evidence of its corruption and corrupt behavior and dishonesty as brought out by the claims made by Suzanne Moore, who has said that her articles were tampered with by The Guardian, instead, which failed or chose not to tell her that they were tampering with her kind of opinion pieces. And they did that subtly. That is to say, they didn't do it brazenly. They changed one word or one phrase here and there. And she began to wonder what was happening. Why were certain phrases and things disappearing and being replaced by blanks or other words that she had not written? So when the Guardian version on Sunday, the Observer, says the Jewish leaders use Holocaust Day to decry persecution of Uyghurs. And they're saying that there is a banner called Uyghur Lives Matter. Of course, Uyghur lives matter. And the fact that there is no solidarity among the people of African and Asian backgrounds against racism, against colonialism, against brainwashing, and against persistent racist denials and obstructions ongoing in the UK today shows that the racists are succeeding and have been successful for 70 years since the racists left the subcontinent formally. As I've said before, one of the Labour Party's members in the House of Peers, and before that he probably was an MP, was invited by brainwashed people to open the Kobe Nazrul Center in Brick Lane in the 1980s. And he was given the prime spot as the main speaker. Now, the extent of stupidity and ignorance on the part of the Labour Party politicians in Britain about the subcontinent was brazenly exhibited by the stupid man. He spoke in Urdu. He spoke a few phrases in Urdu where the actual Nazrul Center was being opened to honor a Bangla language poet. And the explosive role of the dispute that existed in the previous name of Bangladesh, that is East Pakistan, over the throwaway comment made by Muhammad Ali Jinnah in the 1940s about the suitability of Urdu as the future national language of Pakistan. This was one of the most important, significant, explosive political kind of issues. And this man, a Labour Party member of the House of Peers, who was invited by so-called Bengali language supporters that became the mental slaves of the Tower Hamlets Council, funding the Nazrul Center, and the Tower Hamlets and the Greater London Council funding the Nazrul Center. He spoke in Urdu, part of it. And also, he made it worse by referring to Kolkata, not Dhaka. And the Nazrul Center is named after Kavi Nazrul Islam, who was made officially the national poet of Bangladesh in the 1970s, during the 70s, a few years before he died in Dhaka, after being brought there from India. So that is the extent of stupidity on the part of the ones that are given platforms of superiority by the mentally enslaved members of the Bangladeshi community. And the same can be replicated across the other parts and other components of the so-called Black community, that is, African community, whose members are too eager to give superior platforms and status to non-Black people. There should be equal status, not superior, not inferior. Equal status based objectively on the evidence. But that doesn't happen. So, for example, when I wrote a then weekly column in the then West Indian World, then being edited and produced by a man called Alfred Tang Chow. Now, Alfred Tang Chow said that he came from Jamaica of ethnic Chinese origin. And Alfred Tang Chow carried the weekly piece, and he told me that my piece was the biggest selling point for his weekly. Not a surprising discovery, because the rest of it was absolutely, the rest of the West Indian world at that time contained artificial items. Mine was the only original item, and it was of the standard that is higher than any ever produced in Fleet Street, including by writers like Paul Foote. Contents, texts speak volumes. And Alfred Tang Chow then wrote a piece about my keynote speech delivered at the conference in 1980s, mid-1980s, at the event held at the University of Nottingham. Now that was the second event, UK-wide event, attended by African and Asian people that I had given keynote address to. There was no other person, other speaker given that spot. And the reason I was given that spot was because of the work that I had been doing, and the work, the contents of which were recognized as being unique, even by the ones that did not produce anything themselves similar to this or coming anywhere near the contents and the extent and the breadth of what I was writing. And what that was about was to create an ongoing system and the forum and the process whereby the ideas that I summarized in my keynote speech at Nottingham, held at the Nottingham University, could be promoted, progressed, and operated throughout the year, all the time. In other words, to serve as a kind of consolidated response and rebuttal center to contradict and counter and to point out the lies of the racistly operated central government departments, central government agencies, the Houses of Parliament, the judicial bureaucracy, and the racist Fleet Street, and the local councils. That was what I was arguing for essentially. That there was nothing in a composite way, let's say, that could serve as the agency platform to oppose racism day to day, oppose racism in policy terms, oppose racism in historical terms, oppose racism at every stage. That was what I said. It is not some kind of theory. This is what I said, what I meant. What I meant at Nottingham University, where I gave the keynote speech, and this is exactly what I said in my keynote speech, which I delivered as chair of the opening session of the conference held at the end of 1981 in Birmingham. That conference was organized at my initiative. And one of those people who attended that conference as participants on the top table, as it were, was a man called Alex Pascal. Alex Pascal is known as the presenter of what is called Black Londoners on the BBC radio. I had not taken part in any event with him at that time. But what happened was that at the 1981 conference, where I chaired the opening session, the speakers included Alex Pascal and a man called Tasadduq Ahmad, who is now no longer with us. Tasadduq Ahmad, we shall be updating on Tasadduq Ahmad in due course, but he spoke as well. Alex Pascal spoke, Tasadduq Ahmad spoke, and I think Mike Phillips as well spoke. And there was me. And I gave a long speech, which I didn't record on the audio, and there was no videoing of the event as far as I can see. But it was recorded by Alex Pascal. Now I'm saying this because I have asked Alex Pascal to give me the copy of that recording, because I didn't have the copy of the recording. And I repeated, in effect, the request when I met him by accident at the counter at the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court sometime in July 2011. And since that time, I have sent him, Alex Pascal, several emails, all of which he has ignored. Now, except one in which he promised to come to Tower Hamlets and have a conversation, have a meal. I invited him to a meal which he accepted, and he didn't then follow it up. I know Alex Pascal, up to the last time that I checked, is around, but he has chosen not to give me a copy of that speech or that session that I chaired, including, of course, the contents of the speech that I made and the speeches that the others I have named had given. What that included was, of course, the need to create that platform, that organization. Probably, if implemented, it would have a few hundred persons doing few hundred jobs and covering all the areas of discipline, advocacy, representation, analysis, and diagnosis. That would be the necessary parts of the service that the organization, the platform, would carry out. That was 1981 when I suggested that, and then in effect I updated that suggestion in my keynote speech and comments delivered at the UK-wide conference held at a building in the University of Nottingham in England. So that was in the mid-1980s. So 90s, 2000, 2020 now. This is 35, let's say, years or 40 years since the first conference held in Birmingham in 1981, where I chaired the first session. I chaired the daily session that took place the day after as well, and we shall be discussing that in detail. So what I'm saying here is factually based, facts-based. It's not some kind of hypothesis, some assumption. And the reason why I championed the founding of such an organization is quite clear. There is an emptiness that dominates the field, and the field is full of criminals who are what India Knight has written about black people killing other black people. It's like criminals attacking black people, black criminals attacking black activists and black people inside the black communities. That's what is happening. And they're doing the job of mental and physical slaves that give the racists maximum kind of pleasure and deny to the black community as a whole, African background, Asian background, the maximum rights and do the damage. So when they say that the BAME people, that is black, Asian, minority ethnic, is a twisted kind of sentence or twisted phrase, are being denied and deprived equality in the COVID treatment, COVID-19 treatment. They're only referring to a chip, small one, and a piece, and what is called the tip of the iceberg. They're not dealing with all the evidence, most of the evidence. So I didn't stop. I have tried to set up a forum and a platform by organizing an inner London-wide training program under the auspices of the London Collective of Black Governors and the Black Parents Association, which I formed. But the behavior of people from African Asian background has not been consistent with the aims and purposes and the need for such a platform. These people have behaved as stooges or as liars or self-servers, and they have completely sabotaged or denied recognition to or support to the creation of this platform. This platform was not part of the idea to enhance my career. I have never enhanced a career because the career cannot meet the needs of society, of community. So that has not been my purpose. My purpose has been to deliver services and justice to the people who are otherwise denied service and justice by the status quo. So when India Night writes that nobody is talking about that, she exposes her brazen and deep ignorance, which is typical of the brazen and deep ignorance of Fleet Street and elsewhere, and the rest of the mainstream society that she represents. We shall be continuing